So today we have the hold on, BQEYZ Spring 2s. I'll just refer to them as the springs. It's a mouthful. Right, disclaimer before I start the review. The Spring 2s here were provided by Brian, so he bought them secondhand from some guy. Actually traded it in with some additional money for the BQEYZ Neo BGs. And yeah, so we're not affiliated to any store, not to BQEYZ especially. This is actually one of the newer chi-fi brands out there. I think I've only heard of them since last year. I'm not sure when they were established and such. I couldn't really find much information about that on the internet. But yeah, surprisingly, they had something before the Spring 2s. They had the springs only, which got quite a bit of traction. But I've never bothered to really listen to any of them because I just couldn't get around the name and the price that they were selling at. It's not something I could just put my own hard-earned money into it. I considered it quite a gamble, but here we are. Right, so TLDR, the Spring 2s are quite a nice balanced sounding IEM, surprisingly. They're a triple driver technology IEM. They have a piezoelectric ceramic driver for the treble supposedly. They have a balanced armature and a biocellulose dynamic driver. They have 3 types of drivers for one IEM and lots of fans. Right, they're mostly balanced, have a bit of an emphasis in the bass, teeny tiny bit, and they have quite a flat treble. So we'll start off this review like we usually do with bass. So the bass on the Spring 2s I would say is quite nice. There's not much sub bass, but what I liked about the Spring 2s is just the speed of it, and the amount of, there's not much texture to it unfortunately, but the amount of separation in the bass is quite nice, especially for the price that these can be get for. So I believe the Spring 2s are now retailing for about 2-ish million. Correct me if I'm wrong. And this price range, I'm surprised with how well the bass sounds on these. Sub bass obviously leaves a bit less to be desired, as I mentioned earlier. It has some rumble, doesn't extend the most, doesn't slam as hard, but overall I can just hear a lot of detail in the bass. And I'm not sure how to describe the bass. So they're a bit different in their presentation. They don't slam like normal dynamic drivers do. They're a bit quick of a slam, but they don't sustain it that long. They're quite fast, but not too fast that you cannot that it feels thin. Overall, I think I quite like the bass in here. I would love a bit more sub bass and extension and overall rumble. That would make it perfect. But yeah. Now going to the mid range, the bass isn't as emphasized as you would be on something like the Ibasso IT01s, but these still carry some warmth into them. The mid range is quite smooth, quite nice. It doesn't have the biggest body of all other IEMs in this price range, but I think they do well enough. They're not too thin. I think the notes are just right there. I think they're leaning a bit on the thinner side, but I wouldn't call them as thin IEMs. And I don't really have much issues in the mid range. They're very detailed. Maybe grunts, like male vocal grunts, sometimes just aren't quite there. I just miss that. I miss the weight of male vocals sometimes in the Spring 2s. But if you are more of an all-rounder vocal, if you like a bit of a mix of female and male vocals, I think they'll do you quite well. Detail on the mid-range is also quite good. It's not the best. I think In terms of performance, they're just slightly above the T2s, I would say, which is significantly cheaper. But that just speaks to how strong, like how good the T2s are compared to other IEMs in the price range. I think these easily beat something like the IT01s. But there's not much I can say in the mid-range. Although upper mid-range is something I have some issue with on these Spring 2s. Sometimes they can sound a bit harsh, but really only occasionally. Doesn't happen all the time, so not much of an issue here. Treble is where I have a bit of an issue. So the treble on the Spring 2s to me sound kind of a bit zingy. So if you heard something like the Oppo PM2s, which are their headphones, but they have this sort of zing in the treble. So the general presentation is quite flat. It is not much. There's no emphasis at all, I would say. It's just flat, and it's not peaky. But there's this sort of zing, and I'm not sure where it's coming from. I also don't see it in the graphs that I've seen. So I'm not sure what's causing it. It might just be the piezoelectric driver. But that's just me second guessing. I'm not sure what's causing this zing in the treble. So listening to the Spring 2s do get me fatigued quite easily after like 40-ish minutes. 30-ish I would say actually sometimes. Depending on the music that I listen to. If I listen to just some jazz, classical music, it's fine. But if I start listening to something in the top 40s or something like J-pop and stuff, it gets fatiguing very easily. Now, Soundstage and Imaging is where the Spring 2s are interesting. So the Soundstage for me on the Spring 2s, they sound around my head, sometimes even wider, and the center image more like oftentimes extends further than my head. It's mostly around here, just before the front of my head, and yeah, I think it's quite a nice presentation. Although the one problem that I see with the Soundstage on the Spring 2s is that the Spring 2s sound more like the more of a triangle sort of soundstage. They're not really fully around your head. I couldn't really perceive sounds on the back of my head actually. So yeah, that's something you should keep in mind. So it has adequate width, has adequate depth, but yeah, it's not much sound coming in from the back on the Spring 2s for some reason. Imaging is quite okay. I was able to pinpoint 30-ish degrees. I think it's average in terms of imaging capabilities. And yeah. So from that, I think we can just go into the build quality. The Spring 2s are made of CNC'd aluminum. They're quite heavy actually. These like to fall out of my ear if I use anything else other than the stock cable. If I use any supple cables, something like the Lindums, which don't have much of an ear hook. Like this is they have like this preformed ear hook on the IEMs. The Lindums just make these just fall off very easily because of how heavy they are. Fitting wise though, there's not much issue. The nozzle is also metal, so it's just full aluminum. It looks nice and feels nice. I think they will get scratched easily though. I'm not sure, I haven't tried scratching them, but they look like they will, especially because they're colored. They come in green and black. I've seen the blacks, but I think in general the greens just look nicer. They look like leaves in spring. See what I did there. And they have 3 vents here. I'm not sure why they will need so many vents. This does cause the Spring 2s to have a bit less isolation than I would normally desire from an IEM. So isolation isn't the best, but it does also prevent you from having what's it called, driver flex and such. So yeah, cable is quite similar to the IT01's cable, a bit tighter I would say, and they probably have a bit more, how do I say this, they probably have a bit more copper cores in them, I believe, I'm not sure of the spec sheet. I forgot. I don't have the IT01 cables with me right now. Hold on. Yeah, I don't have them with me right now. There's a straight jack on the cable. As I usually say, straight jacks on a portable audio product is a no-go for me. I would prefer an angle jack. The chin slider is also quite big. It's like this clear thing, and this splitter itself is quite heavy, so it does dangle around your neck. Cable is also quite microphonic, and because of how heavy this is, it just tends to just whoosh around when you try to just hit it, like put up the chin slider to your chin. So general microphonics isn't the best, but I must say the spring tools in general, they just look attractive, I would say, with the cable. Except for the name, I don't think you would want to post an Instagram photo with you wearing the BQEYZ IEMs. But that's just nitpicking. And another interesting thing here, which I should have mentioned in the sound comparison actually, is that the BQEYZ spring tools come with, well, how many are these? 6 pairs of ear tips? 6 pairs of ear tips and a pair of foam tips. They have a reference and atmosphere ear tips. So the atmosphere, supposedly they sound a bit more open. Reference are a bit more closed in. And in general testing, I would say that the reference have a bit more bass than the atmosphere do. I prefer the atmosphere because it gives a bit more of a bigger soundstage, which I guess it's probably because there's less isolation. But that's just me guessing. I'm not sure what these ear tips do to the sound, why they changed it so drastically. I would say that's probably the bore size of them. So I'll just pull out the M size ear tips here. Hold on. Okay. So these are the reference ear tips. The reference ear tips have a bigger bore compared to the atmosphere ones. There's a bit more perceived bass on the reference. Right. Audio recording cut off there. There's a bit more bass in the reference ear tips, I would say. They also come with this nice carrying case. It's quite big. It's like, how big is this? I think these are about 10-12 centimeters in terms of length, about 5-7-ish centimeters in terms of width. And the foam ear tips they come with, I haven't tried them. Nobody has touched the foam ear tips as far as I know. We usually like to keep them clean so that when we sell them, because foam ear tips just get nasty if you use them, so whenever they're unused, we generally just keep them clean and then just sell them as clean as possible. They're just, foam ear tips in general are just very hard to clean. But I did try them with my foam ear tips, which looked very similar to these, which are the Moondrop MS tips. I prefer the silicone ear tip sounds. The foam ear tip just sounded a bit more closed in, because I'm guessing that's probably because there's more isolation to the foam ear tips. But yeah. Anyway, comparison wise, so in this price range, I would compare them to the IT01s. I don't have them on my desk right now. I think I put them somewhere, but I forgot. But the IT01s, I would say the IT01s are more of a V-shaped sound. These are a lot more balanced, and the IT01s are, to be fair, quite a bit cheaper, and they come with a lot more ear tips and accessories. And other than that, in terms of this price range, with the IT01s, I think the spring tools in this price range, they perform quite excellently. They have faster bass than the IT01s. They have more detailed mid-range than the IT01s, but I prefer the mid-range in the IT01s because it's just smoother and more there's more grunt in the mid-range, especially in male vocals. treble, I would say I can what's it called? I forgot the word here. I can tolerate. I can tolerate the treble of the IT01s a lot more than I can on the Spring 2s. Other comparisons in this price range would include something like the TFZ King. So the TFZ King, they're currently, I think they're sold for $100 US. The TFZ Kings are more of a V-shaped sound. Technicalities wise, I would say the Spring 2s are still better, and bass, I would say I prefer the bass on the Spring 2s. There's a bit more bass on the Kings, and sub bass rumble is better on the Kings. Treble, I think it's better on the Spring 2s. The treble on the Kings sometimes makes me a bit winch a bit sometimes, a bit more than the Spring 2s does. Technicalities, Spring 2 wins, no questions asked. And I think another comparison I can make to the Spring 2s is the KXSS and the Starfields. I will just compare to them Starfields, because we have a review of the Starfields. So compared to the Starfields, the Spring 2s, I prefer the tonality of the Starfields. The Starfields are more of a Harman, like a safe Harman target sort of soundstage width is actually wider on the Spring 2s. I would say that's probably because they have less bass than the Starfields. Sub bass there's a bit more sub bass on the Starfields, more rumble on the Starfields. Mid bass is faster on the Spring 2s. The mid range is also clearer on the, like, it's thinner on the Spring 2s. Female vocals are less shouty on the Spring 2s, I would say, but they're not like, it's not like the Starfields are that shouty in the upper mid range. Treble though, I can tolerate the treble on the Starfields a lot better than I can on the Spring 2s, although the Starfields, as I believe, measure like they have more treble than the Spring 2s do. Technicalities wise, the Spring 2s, I would say, are a smidgen above the Starfields. They're probably more on par with the KXSS, or actually even better than the KXSS. Okay, so aside from that, I don't think there's any more comparisons I can do right now. I'll leave what Brian thinks right about now. Like if you liked it, comment what you think, and subscribe if you want more content like this. See you.